Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Notre Dame, Georgia quarterfinal matchup is set. And Dill, one of the more frustrating, narratives heading into this matchup are kind of coming out of this weekend. And look, I'll take an opportunity to dunk on Kurt Signetti any chance I get. The narrative I feel like is Indiana's a bad football team, shouldn't have been in the college football playoffs. All of much, might be true. Nobody's talking about what this Notre Dame team looked like and how they looked very, very good. And you look at Notre Dame and say, that's one of the more complete football teams that you see in all of the country. Now, is it enough to beat Georgia and compete for a national championship? That's what I want to get into over the next couple of minutes. Excited to get into this matchup. There's a lot of really intriguing storylines heading into this one. Before we get into it, as always, most importantly, let it fly in the comment section. Notre Dame fans, Georgia fans, just college football fans. A lot of different ways you can see this game playing out. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, to me, the biggest storyline of this game, this Notre Dame offense versus this Georgia defense, it's no secret what makes this Notre Dame offense so dynamic. That's running the football. Jeremiah Love, in my opinion, emerging as one of the better running backs in the country, along with an offensive line that has dealt with some injuries. They've shuffled the deck a little bit. There are some question marks at times in pass protection, but in terms of running the football, like this is a unit that can really move some bodies off the line of scrimmage. Notre Dame wants to run the football. It's hard to run the football against this Georgia front seven. How do you see this matchup playing out here?
And that is the question, because I look like one big thing I think people underrate about Notre Dame's rushing attack is how explosive it's kind of made this offense. And again, their downfield passing attack, they don't really have a ton of it, if you will. But they hit big plays through the run because Jeremiah Love, I mean, his speed, his ability to make guys miss in space, really unique. And they've done a good job, even against teams like Texas A&M in Indiana, like the big teams they played, if you will. They've been able to manufacture those big runs. You look at the way Georgia plays defense, like they're not the same as some of those teams that like to get upfield with their defensive line and create creases. I look at the way Brinson and Stackhouse, like when they go play at Texas, like there's just not a ton of room in the middle because those guys do a really good job tying up blockers, not letting them get to the second level. So their numbers never look great. But man, that's a really dynamic duo in the middle. And if Notre Dame can't hit those big runs, I do wonder, like, can they just methodically march on this Georgia team? Because that's a really tall task.
That's where it starts, right? What does the run game for Notre Dame look like? And I'll say this, and I think a lot of Notre Dame fans would probably agree. It's hard to see Notre Dame coming in and just running it all over Georgia. You have a feeling if you want to win this football game, Riley Leonard in this passing attack, they'll need to play a role, but I think they'll specifically need to play a role pushing the ball down the field. Look, Glenn Schumann, Kirby Smart, they're a hell of a lot smarter than me in terms of designing a defensive game plan. But if I'm heading into this matchup, I am heavy boxing Notre Dame and seeing if they want to push the ball down the field. We're taking our safeties, putting them in the box, trying to stop that run game and saying, hey, Riley Leonard and these Notre Dame pass catchers, can you win vertically against us? And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if Notre Dame can't push the ball down the field. You just haven't really seen them need to do it. You get a feeling like they'll need to do it against a team like Georgia. I think the second storyline here is if you're Georgia, not only are you kind of loading up the box, I think you are squeezing down on this Notre Dame passing attack too. Because you look at Riley Leonard, I mean, average depth of target of only 5.5 yards against Indiana. Only 7.5 on the season. This is a Notre Dame team that wants to manufacture their passing yards kind of short on intermediate routes and yards after the catch. You look at Notre Dame, I mean, this is a good sign for Mike Denbrock, and this is one of the things I think he's done a brilliant job of. 2,500 passing yards on the year, 1,300 of those have come after the catch. If you're Georgia, you're trying to take away the yards after the catch. You're trying to tackle in space, and that's going to be a significant storyline here. They want to get the football out to guys like Jordan Faison. If you're Georgia, you got to come up and tackle in space. If you can do that and try to stop this Notre Dame rushing attack, that's where I think it puts Georgia in a good spot to stop this Notre Dame offense.
And that's where I wonder if Notre Dame does have a bit of a wrinkle in their offense, because I
Yeah.
think you kind of know the recipe. They don't want to ask Riley Leonard to do too much. I think that's put him in a position to make mistakes early on in the season. So they've kind of found their rhythm in terms of what they want him to do. They want him to protect the ball. They want him to be involved in the run game and just make the easy throws that kind of come to him and base everything off of those running backs that are obviously stars. But I look at a guy like Mitchell Evans, who I don't think's totally found a huge role in this offense. Like, he's a guy you look at last year, like against a team like Ohio State, where you knew they were going to need to do something a little different than maybe what Notre Dame just wants to do. He was a guy that I felt like was able to, when he got his matchups, take advantage of some of those down the field. Like, I wonder, do they have that from the tight end room? Do they have one of those younger wide receivers like a Micah Gilbert, who they can put into this game and be a bit of a problem in man-to-man coverage down the field? I am wondering if they have that type of wrinkle. They have some talent to do it.
We've seen Georgia struggle at times playing the football vertically down the field. You go back to that Alabama game. To me, it feels like Notre Dame's going to have to find some sort of element of that in this football game. Last thing, pass pro. Look, this Notre Dame, and I give Marcus Freeman a ton of credit. We started with this. There's been a lot of injuries to this football team on the offensive line, including a lot of shuffling the deck. This offensive line can run block their tails off. In pass protection, you've seen it struggle at times. Micah Williams, Jalen Walker, creating some negative plays, putting Notre Dame in those spots where it is second and third and long, those obvious drop back passing situations. If you can put Notre Dame in those spots, it does make that offense be a little bit more uncomfortable. Moving to the other side of the football, Dylan, every time you preview a Notre Dame game, it's really hard to find, like, all right, what does the opposing offense try to do to attack Notre Dame? Because it's such a solid defense at all three levels. You know, it's one of those defenses you look at and say there's just not many ways you can have a ton of success because of how good they are. I look at it, and again, the storyline for me, Gunnar Stockton, you feel like they're going to lean into the run game a little bit more. It's kind of the same storyline, because if you're Notre Dame, you trust your defensive back. Some of the better, it might be the best secondary in the country, kind of holding up on islands against Georgia pass catchers that have struggled to be consistent all year. I think you're doing the exact same thing we talked about this Georgia defense. Like, you are walking a safety into the box. You are trying to take away the run game, which Georgia will try to lean on with Gunnar Stockton at quarterback, and say, hey, can Gunnar Stockton and these Georgia pass catchers that have struggled mightily at times this year, can you go in on the outside? That's probably what you're doing if you're Marcus Freeman heading into this matchup.
Because you look at, like, when Benjamin Morris went down, I think you had a lot of questions of what would this Notre Dame secondary kind of be, because he was such a stalwart in terms of, like, kind of basing their defense off of his ability to kind of
it's been just fine.
And you look at Leonard Moore, he's been unbelievable. Christian Gray, he's been good right through the years. So, and you said it, like, I don't know that there's an easy matchup necessarily for Georgia to get to on the boundary. The one place I look in terms of, like, that matchup of Georgia's trying to be physical and bully Notre Dame around versus a really good defensive front. The only thing about Notre Dame's defensive front is they're not huge and they're not super deep, it doesn't feel like at this point. Like, Riley Mills and Howard Cross, when Howard Cross is healthy, takes up a lot of reps. And then you go into the guys behind him, like Heinisch plays good, not a huge defensive tackle. Rubio, I feel like, he's played pretty good as well, not a giant defensive tackle. I wonder, like, against a really big physical road grading offensive line that, frankly, Notre Dame hasn't really had to play. You look at their schedule in the ACC, they don't see rushing attacks like Georgia. I do wonder how, like, can Georgia just be physical and grind on them a little bit, because that is one thing I don't think Notre Dame's had to deal with.
And you kind of throw in also Riley Mills, we saw go down in that game. Marcus Freeman said we're trying to get him back healthy. And Cross has been dealing with some injuries too. Like, those are the guys for Notre Dame up front. That's probably the recipe for Georgia. The other thing
is also, like, you look like those two are so important because they're the negative play creators. And that's something Notre Dame really leans on in the run. Because, again, I don't know that, like, front seven to front seven versus, like, teams like Georgia, they're like totally that type of body in the two deep, if you will. But they have guys at the front who really do a good job creating negative plays. And, like, Howard Cross, to me, might be the most underrated defensive tackle in the country in terms of how dominant he can be. So that's something I'm probably going to be my first kind of ear, like, looking for early in that game, is what does that defensive line look like? How healthy are those guys? And can Georgia grind on them a little bit?
Agreed. And like getting a guy like ETN with a couple weeks off, like back healthy. And this Georgia, like Kirby Smart said it after they won the SEC championship, like we're just excited to get a couple weeks off and get some of these guys healthy. Tight ends getting involved. I feel like, look, if you're Georgia, you probably don't love the matchups with your wide receivers on the outside. Like that's probably not something you want to attack if you're trying to get something going in the passing attack, especially with a quarterback too. Go lean on some big body pass catchers and tight ends. And I feel like whenever we see Georgia's offense humming, it is getting the tight ends involved a significant amount in the passing attack. That's
But
probably the
that's not
matchup.
easy with Notre Dame because I look like
Agreed.
really athletic at the linebacker spot.
Agreed.
That Jalen Sneed, what he plays and that role, really tough for tight ends to deal with because he's that type of athlete. I look at Drake
Yeah.
Bowen. He's had an unbelievable year, I think, for them.
Yeah.
Really good athlete, obviously Kaiser as well. So it's not an easy defense, I
No.
don't think, especially because the safeties are great too. Like Xavier Watts might be one of the best safeties in the country.
I think you're looking at the two best, and I'll just say get Notre Dame and Georgia fans agreeing on something. You might be looking at the two best safeties in the country there. I mean, Xavier Watts, you could throw Caleb Downs in that conversation too, no doubt. Like Malachi Starks and Xavier Watts, it doesn't get much better than those two in the back end. Let's get into the pick here, Dill. 1.5 points. We'll just take a pick here. Notre Dame, Georgia. Who you got?
I got Georgia, and it starts with just I'm not sure what Notre Dame's answer is going to be if Georgia can stop the run. And I look at when Georgia's played teams that want to establish the run, and I look at Texas. Like every other game they've played, they've been able to run the ball on anyone, even a team like Clemson, which I was stunned to see that they were able to just kind of pound on them like that.
Yeah.
They were able to do it, and then they go bump against Georgia, and you see the way those defensive tackles eat blocks up. You see the way those linebackers fly around. It's such a tough team to run the ball on. And I look, there are some avenues. I feel like there's some young, really talented wide receivers for Notre Dame that I wonder if they can be problems down the field. I look at a guy like Mitchell Evans. At times in his career, he's been a real problem getting down the field when he's gotten his matchups. So I feel like there's an avenue. It's just Notre Dame hasn't had to show it yet. They haven't had to prove it. And then on the other side, I am a little concerned about the depth and the health in Notre Dame's front seven because those two defensive tackles are so important. And if you can kind of wear on them, if you're Georgia, that's obviously always been their kind of answer.
All right. I think you're forgetting about one crucial thing in this pick, and we probably should have talked about it earlier, but I'll talk about it now. When have we seen Georgia struggle to stop the run with athletic quarterbacks, right? Haynes King struggled in a big way. Riley Leonard can be that guy. And this is one of those games where Riley Leonard's been involved in the run game all year. This is one of those games where you're going to get him thoroughly involved in the run game. That's given Georgia some problems at times. It kind of takes that Georgia bite, that aggression, kind of away from that defense. Yes, I have question marks about Notre Dame consistently running the football as well, but with the addition of Riley Leonard, the addition of Mike Denbrock doing a really good job scheming up the run game too, I think Notre Dame will be able to run the football more effectively than most people think. And for that reason, I'm going to go Notre Dame. And at times, this Georgia front seven has underwhelmed. And there's been times where they dominated football games too, but we've seen that front seven struggle with guys like Riley Leonard at cornerback. For that reason, I'm going to take Notre Dame in a big game. Marcus Freeman, biggest win of his coaching career at Notre Dame. We'll see how it plays out. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.